Gentlemen, the Magnolia Society of Philosophy and Light conducts quarterly education and discussion sessions here online. Our purpose is to assist the improvement of oneself by establishing a deeper appreciation for philosophy, to exchange ideas and theories and perspectives on a variety of topics. We hope to stimulate discussions, debates, and presentations that stimulate critical thinking and broaden participants' understanding of different philosophical concepts. By fostering a space for philosophical inquiry and dialogue, these gatherings contribute to the promotion and appreciation of philosophy within our society. They help to highlight the relevance and significance of philosophical thinking in addressing contemporary issues and enriching our each individual lives. Brethren, while these presentations are not limited to Masons, we are all Masons here tonight. So I'll remind you that these are education sessions and are in no way to substitute for a lodge or regular stated communications. Similarly, these are not tiled meetings. Gentlemanly manners are expected to be maintained during the meeting. No drinking, no smoking, or foul language will be permitted. We'll remove you if you do not follow the protocol. There'll be a live question and answer and discussion period following the presentation in which we all may participate. Tonight's presenter is Worshipful Brother Stephen Bush. Brother Bush was initiated, passed, and raised at Cleveland Lodge number 470 in 2010, and he's currently a member and secretary of Summit Lodge number 231. Brother Bush has served as a district deputy grand lecturer for the Grand Lodge of Mississippi from 2013 to 2020, and was a member of the Grand Lodge Education Committee from 2017 to 2020. At this time, we'll turn the floor over to Brother Bush for his presentation.
Brethren, can you see that slideshow?
We can see the Google Doc portion of it. If you're presenting it as a show, I see the Google Docs.
Let me make sure that I can. Oh, now everything's going to still install. There we go. Good evening, brethren, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present tonight. One of the things that I like to do in my own personal study is write, and writing helps me to absorb the take in the information on my own. It's one of my learning styles. And a couple months ago, I wrote a paper to present at my own lodge called Alchemy, a Primer Study. This is an elementary study of alchemy, its esoteric practices, theories, and how those may relate to our fraternity of Freemasonry. When you start talking about alchemy, one of the first things that pops into the brain is the imagery of old men and dusty robes and labs and mixing concoctions and stirring, brewing all sorts of things. And we associate that immediately because of our influences with the word occult. Well, when you define the word occult means covered over. And a lot of these images and a lot of this meaning just means hidden and secret. As Brother Jim noted in a former conversation that we were having, that term is used in medical practices for something that cannot be seen. Now we associate it with, or it's now associated with knowledge that belongs to a select group or a hidden realm, particularly one of a powerful spirit or a supernatural force. So why would these people need to cover, these alchemists need to hide their workings? The biggest one is to prevent themselves from persecution, the unwanted exposure, and even the replication of their own success. Things that we might consider occult today would be things like Druidism, pure magic, true will, astrology, Hermeticism, animism, Gnosticism, and all of these play an important role in the study of alchemy. Alchemy is the medieval forerunner of chemistry. And it answers two primary questions. One, of how things are made, and two, of what. The goals of the ancient alchemists were twofold. Particular actions, which did one thing specific, and universal actions, which did more than one thing. One of the words that's been associated with this is called transmutation, or the breaking down of one matter to create a new substance. The Greeks, Cleopatra of, I don't have my note there. One of the ancient alchemists, Cleopatra, and not the Cleopatra of Egypt that we associate with the rain, called it chrysiopeia, meaning gold making. The other universal action was to recombine those substances to create the philosopher's stone. You've probably heard that word before, the sorcerer's stone, mostly the philosopher's stone. And it was claimed to be a legendary alchemical substance that would provide the elixir of life, thereby granting immortality and or the ability to transmute. On the screen, and I guess we'll go back even further, is an amalgamation of three individuals, one being Thoth or Thoth or Thoth, depending on how you say it, the Egyptian philosopher Hermes Trismegistus, and the Greek god Mercury, or I guess it'd be Roman god Mercury. These three individuals, personifications, whatever you want to call them, amalgamate to make up the founder of the Hermetic philosophy, Hermeticism. Hermes Trismegistus is also supposed to have created the Emerald Tablet, which on which he carved all the secrets of the universe as given to him through divine wisdom. Now, the tablets have never been discovered, and it's unclear the source of the text. And much of the text is written in cryptic meanings. But the medieval and Renaissance alchemists considered this the foundation of the art. Artists like Isaac Newton, Roger Bacon, John Dee of the Victorian era, and even Aleister Crowley all made commentary on the Emerald Tablet, although no author claims to have discovered the entire truth. Most of the time when people talk about alchemy, they hear or they think about the name in popular literature, Nicholas Flamel. Flamel lived somewhere circa 1330, 1340 to March 22nd, 1480 in France. In truth, he was a scribe and a merchant of manuscripts. By his own claim, he claimed to have learned the secrets of alchemy and the creation of the philosopher's stone from a Jewish convert on the Santiago de Compostela. There are many legendary accounts of Flamel having dabbed in alchemy, but very few of them none of them can be sourced. One of the things that is interesting about Nicholas Flamel and alchemy being an occult practice is that this is the headstone that this is his headstone that he had carved, and the three depictions at the top are that of St. Peter, St. Paul, and Christ. He was buried in Paris in 1480, and he designed the headstone in 1418, and designed the headstone in 1410. All right. Alchemists took great care in order to document their observations and experimentations, but much of their writings and illustrations are written through the concept of allegory, where these characters and actions are described as something other than what they actually are. The ancient practitioners believed that only the true adepts would be able to decipher the code, and their shrouded secrets have led to much speculation in modern history. An ancient alchemist must be a master of metallurgy, minerals, geology, goldsmithing, philosophy, medicine, astronomy, and astrology, because all of these played an important part. Later in their years, alchemists began to move away from the metal side and moved into a more medicinal side. They believed that the human body could be treated like a natural alchemical workshop. Most of these alchemists in the Renaissance period were employed as physicians. And although they didn't abandon the practice of transmutation, it was there was a more high of a focus on pharmaceuticals and chematria, or chemistry, of the time. Through their through their therapeutics and through the pharmaceuticals, they attempted to move to a legendary process called paleogenesis. In Greek, paleogenesis means life again. They believed that by rendering a substance to its base form, they could reconstitute those minerals and revive the dead. One of the most well-known and the father of toxicology is Paracelsus. He was born in Sweden in 1493 to 1541, although Paracelsus was not his true name. His birth name was Theophrastus Philippus Aurelius Bombastus von Hohenheim. He was a child of a German chemist, and his father worked at a mine. Well, in working at a mine, Paracelsus began to study and observe these diseases that the miners took upon themselves. Well, he enrolled in the University of Austria, earning a baccalaureate degree. He continued with his medical degree at the University of Ferrara in Italy, and received his doctorate in 1516, which is more than likely where he took on the Latin name Paracelsus, changing his name to mimic the Latin traditions of the time. By his own writings, he traveled extensively through Europe, and much of his writing is documented. He criticized the medical practices of his colleagues and beliefs of medicine at the time, so he was not very popular. But in his book, The Book of the Three Principles, Paracelsus argues that all diseases should be named after their cures. An example, leprosy should be called gold disease, and epilepsy should be called vitriol disease. Now, in medical practices, he is known as the father of toxicology, and is quoted with saying, "The dose makes the poison," meaning you can take enough of anything, but the dose makes the poison. All right, into it. Ancient alchemists believed that all material was made up of a combination of the tria prima, or three primes. This was a combination of sulfur, salt, and mercury. And each of these had both a spiritual side and a physical side. Sulfur was the principle of combustibility. It also represented the soul of man and reflected consciousness of extreme thought. It connected the high, being salt, with the low, being mercury. Sulfur is named, the Latin word is sulphurium, meaning burning stone, and its more ancient name was brimstone, which can be found in both the Torah and the Bible and several other biblical and canonical writings. It is the third most abundant mineral in the human body, and it is represented by a triangle on top of the cross. It may also be represented by an infinity sign with a cross with another one. There's a name for that. I can't remember.
That's what did you say that represents, Stephen?
That also that represents that is another sign representing sulfur. And before I moved on, I was going to tell you that that's also been used to represent. That's also been used to represent Satanism, and has been referred to also as the Satan's cross.
Leviathan cross.
The patriarchal cross too, right?
At the top part is the
Sorry, say again?
patriarchal cross. The top part is patriarchal cross, but the combination with the infinity sign was used in that Dan Brown series. That Mike, that you and I watched. I can't remember, and
The
it's
law
also,
symbol.
and it may be on the Oreo cookie, which means Oreos are bad.
I like Oreos. I don't particularly like Satan, but I like Oreos. All right, move on. All right, Mercury. Mercury is the second of the primes and supports the idea of liquidity. Sometimes it's known by its ancient name, Quicksilver, and it represents the symbol of life and death. It also represents the spiritual, the intellect, imagination, moral judgment, and a higher consciousness. Biblically, the alchemists referred to Mercury as Jacob's ladder, connecting the physical with the spiritual. In the principle of duality, Mercury carries a feminine personification due to its ability to conform and transform to the harmony of the vessel that it's placed in. It is named after Mercury, or Hermes, who is the messenger of the gods. And Mercury represents the hidden truth. The gift given to man directly from the divine. Interestingly, boundary stones were placed and across the ancient Greek world, and those were called herma, or heap of stones, or boundary makers, and they were used as to symbolize protection, divine blessing, and sexual energy. These statues were often sculpted with a man's head and an erect phallus, and the practice of blessing the crossroad is found through various unorthodox systems. The symbol of Mercury is that of its alchemical sign, which is the caduceus staff, or the herald's staff. Originally, it was a willow rod, which was intertwined with ribbons, and now it's intertwined with snakes. In some medical practices, this is used, but mostly you see another rod with one snake being curled. There we go. The last of the tria prima was salt, which represented the earthly, or represented the body, the principle of the physical. It also represented our lower consciousness, knowledge, and wisdom. The body does not naturally produce salt, yet it's one of the most important minerals required for our function. It is the only rock that is directly consumed by man. To the ancient Egyptians, salt was used in the mummification process to purify both the soul and the body. Roman soldiers were paid in salt. In Old Testament and in Scripture, in Old Testament Scripture, we read numerous references of salt. Lot's wife being turned to salt. In the book of Exodus, Leviticus, Ezekiel, Ezra, salt is referenced as an incense of offering. In the book of Numbers and Second Chronicles, it's represented as a covenant and friendship. In Psalm, Job, Jeremiah, Judges, it refers to the salt lands of the earth. To the alchemist, the salt was a representation of the incorruptible and the dissolving ego. The bitterness of salt represented divine growth. The salt plants. Aside from the tree of Prima were the 4 classical elements: fire, water, earth, and air. The idea that these 4 elements made up all matter was a cornerstone of Hermetic philosophy, science, and medicine long before alchemical practices. Hippocrates referenced them as the humors or temperaments. In Aristotle's writings, he referenced a new element, the unchanging and heavenly substance, neither hot nor cold, wet nor dry, that which he called the aether, or the void, the spiritual. Fire represents the intellect. Prometheus, in the ancient Greek myth, stole fire from Mount Olympus and gave it to man so that mankind could advance. Heat from the fire purges all impurities and refines the materials into perfect form. Alchemists believed it represented their passions and desires, a tool to be balanced. Water represented the fluidity of the spirit and consciousness. It was a representation of the giving, nurture, and the adapt. An alchemist must be pure, flexible, and adaptable in order to trust in the path of the divine. Air represented the mind and soul. God breathed air into Adam during creation, but it also represented the ineffable name of God, neither to be known nor spoken. Earth was a base matter and the firm foundation of all understanding. To the alchemist, the earth was associated with any physical matter or the processing of matter of the world around us. Although the word alchemy is not entirely understood in its etymology, it may represent the land of Kemet, Egypt, the Black Land, referring to either the people of the land or the fertile soul that gave birth to ancient civilization. Aside from the tree of Prima and the 4 classical elements, later adopted as 5, was the prima materna, or prima materna, prima materia, or prime material. From ancient antiquity to the mid-1800s, planetary metals were 7. The celestial bodies were the representation of the gods, and the celestial bodies had rule and governance over their core material. The first was the sun, and was the first form of primitive worship, bringing forth hope, warmth, comfort, protection, spiritual fire, purity, light, intellect, and acts as a force on all other elements. They associated this with gold, as gold was believed to warm the body, control infection, relax the blood vessels, and create new cells. It was also an authoritative male force. Confidence, creativity, fortune, and magical powers were found in gold and in the sun. To the Persians, it was called Mithros, or that which is binding, the bright male deity under the pantheon of the bright male deity and ruler of the pantheons of Persians, normally seen wrestling a bull. He was the god of justice, the guardian of cattle, and the all-seeing protector of truth. In Greece, it was personified as Apollo, or the light bringer, driving his sun chariot through the sky. In Egypt, the sun god was Ra, representing the divine right of the pharaohs. In heraldic elements, it also represents the king's divine right. Gold is recognized by AU on the periodic table, meaning autumn or glowing or aura. This symbol is the moon, and was the mystic secret power of immortality, intuition, and illumination. It also represented the doorway into the subconscious and emotions, the ebb and flow of the waters, the temperaments of the plants and animals. Anyone in teaching or in the medical field knows that the full moon has an effect on us as human beings. Alchemists would also often collect morning dew, and its correspond for their experiments, as they believed that it was a gift from the moon. In medical practices, its corresponding metal was silver and was used as a cure-all. For years, colloidal silver was created and administered as a liquid concoction. To the magicians, silver was thought to be able to repel demons, keep evil at bay. Early Christians in the Christian church kept their water and holy water in silver vessels. To the Egyptians, it was Khonshu, the god of the moon and travelers, the god of the embrace and defender of justice. Even in modern culture, werewolves, vampires, witches, and the Lone Ranger can all be, werewolves, vampires, and witches can all be driven away with silver. The Lone Ranger is even known as having carried silver bullets. We've already talked about Mercury as an element of the prima materia, so I'll skip it. And the next is Saturn. Saturn was the first worship of astrology independent of that of the sun and moon. They believed that the rings of Saturn were the radiance of the holy powers of Kronos, the first of the Titans and slayer of his father Uranus. Saturnalia was a Roman festival of celebration in the god's honor, associated with the winter solstice, and was celebrated until late antiquity, until the rise of Christianity. In Sanskrit, it represented the hard way. In Hebrew traditions, it was the Shabbatai, which was conducive to the fourth commandment of Jewish faith. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Its corresponding metal was lead, the first known throughout history. The Romans were said to have had the ability to create white lead. White lead formed the basis of paints for more than 2,000 years until it was removed in the 1970s. Lead poisoning can still be referred to as Saturnism, although sometimes it's referred to as plumbism, which is represented on the periodic table as Pb. To the alchemist, lead represented the principle of control and connected the skeletal structure. This symbol is familiar to most and is a representation of Mars, the masculine, divine, vitality, passion, courage, and will. Its metal is that of iron, which is the second oldest metal, or sometimes called ferrum, which is represented on the periodic table by Fe. In Genesis 4:22, Tubal-Cain is said to have forged all kinds of tools out of bronze and iron, although bronze is not considered a planetary metal as it is a form of alloy and tin. Mars was represented by the Greeks as that of Ares, the god of war, and iron was linked to the gallbladder, pancreas, blood flow, and male genitalia. In 1 Kings 6:7, in the building of Solomon's temple, we learned that no iron tool was used in its building, in its construction. To the alchemist, iron gave energy and drive to continue their work, courage in the face of the deepest fears and trauma. This sign might also be familiar, as it is Venus, representation of the divine female, beauty, love, and lust. It represents the artistic, fertility, and balance. Its corresponding metal is copper, in Latin, which is cuprum, Cu. To the Egyptians, it was symbolized by the Ankh, which is a familiar religious symbol representing the force of the universe. In medical practices, copper is essential for the body and stabilizing blood pressure, low energy, and the thyroid. Newborn infants are said to have up to 4 times the concentration of copper serum, which deteriorates as they grow older. Venus has a unique orbit. For every 8 orbits of the Earth, Venus orbits 13 times, creating the sign on your bottom right, which is a form of the pentagram. Venus was a feminine force and is still used as a representation for the feminine in society today. Jupiter is the personification of wisdom, logic, education, and maturity. Its metal is tin, SN from the Latin word stanum. This was the metal of the sages and scholars. It was the metal of meditation, balance of the philosophical. Often jovial was its name. In medical practices, oils of tin were used in the treatment of liver, jaundice, hepatitis, cirrhosis, certain types of eczema, inflammation, acne, and water retention. To the Greeks, Zeus was the god of the thunder and sky, and as the god of thunder and sky, had a jovial demeanor with a thunderous rage. Jovial was a source of cheer, expansive thought, and could provide access to the powerful. Other signs and symbols that the alchemists might use were non-ordinary signs called the mundane signs. Take a minute so that you can look through some of those. The mundane were considered lesser or secondary materials in the practice of alchemy. They were believed to be a combination of the tria prima and planetary metals. These were things like antimony, arsenic, bismuth, magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, and zinc. In the practice of alchemy, there was a 3, 4, 7, 12, and 14 different stages, depending on what work you decide to read. The magnum opus of creating material into the philosopher's stone included 4 general stages, which 3 are depicted here because one of them is associated with the one in the center. The first was called the negredo, or blackness, where the material was dried, decayed, and heated until it turned black. Sometimes ravens were often depicted in this stage. The second stage was called the albedo stage, or the whitening, that washed away its impurities. And a dove might be used in representing this stage. As a part of that second stage, light would be dawned on the element, sometimes referred to as citrinus, or the yellowing stage, also considered an albedo. The fourth stage, or third stage, depending on how you're looking at this, was called the rubedo stage, or the reddening. This stage signified success and would be represented in their illustrations as a phoenix, blood, crown prince, roses, blooming flowers, or a figure wearing red. This represented both gold and the philosopher's stone, which were associated with the stage in early practices. The 4 coloring stages eventually evolved into 7, 12, and 14. In the stage of 7 was calcination, or the transformation into ash, dissolution, which was the submersion and waiting water, or submersion into water and waiting for separation, separation, which was the filtering of the parts, conjunction, which was the balance and combination of the parts, fermentation, living organisms were introduced into the material to continue its breakdown, distillation, in which it was fiercely boiled, maintained, and carefully condensed, and coagulation, which was complete transformation of the original material. By the late 1600s and early 1700s, new physical sciences had gained popularity. In the rise of Christianity through Europe, the practices of alchemy were attacked as being dangerous and evil. Practitioners were seen as unsavory, low class, and lacking in formal education. And most of its practices were driven underground. In relationship to Freemasonry, Freemasonry specifically seeks to take man to make a man aware of his rough nature and take him from his imperfect state and transmute him using the principles of the fraternity into a state of perfection or one of enlightenment, much like alchemy. At a fundamental level, could this not be considered a practice of spiritual alchemy? The alchemist does the same thing in taking the elements and breaking down them to hopefully be rejoined to a state of perfection. In regards to the alchemical process, a herb or element would be selected in accordance with its planetary metal or planetary influence, dug out by the roots in order to remain intact, hung, dried, ground, burned, and placed in a vessel called an alembic, which is there on your left, to digest. In some writings, it would be placed into a sand bath for a whole day and shaken at a minimum of twice to assure that the oil separated completely. This would be considered its caput mortem, its deadhead, or its first death. The minerals and oils were considered the vitals and were separated from the body through the direct heat and the liquid of steam, captured as condensation. During the distillation, holes would appear in the physical material left behind, which would be normally represented in engravings by beast, representation of passing through the classical element of earth. What remained was twofold: the oils, which were sulfur, which burned, and alcohol, or the spirits, or mercury, which is where we get the word spirits for alcohol and also mercury. Mercury was associated with the liquid and often depicted as spirits in the alcohol sense. To extract the salts, the alchemists would pull the bowels from what were left off of the original vessel. The remnants, called the bowels or the feces, were then burned and sifted through. And considering final ideas, what if the philosopher's stone, or the azoth, as it's sometimes referred to, was not a physical stone at all? What if the stone was merely an alchemical allegory for enlightenment? It may stand to reason that the alchemists, through true practitioners, failed consistently in creating the philosopher's stone, but they did succeed in leaving the system of personal reflection and self-improvement that's been associated with many organizations since. What is the end goal of our fraternity? What is our great revelation? And how will we know when it's been obtained? Regarding its symbolism, is it so far-fetched to believe that these ancient practitioners purposefully left secret code in order to help us in a sense of control and a sense of privacy? I find it hard not to see a correlation between the influences of alchemy, astrology on the fraternity, and understand that alchemy can easily constitute a field of rabbit holes. I honestly admit that I am no expert and have no direct practical knowledge of the art, but I find it interesting, and I hope that in this primary study you found it interesting too. Thank you.
Brother Bush, thank you very much. That was definitely interesting to me. I have skimmed your paper that you had sent out previously, but to hear it in your own words, in your own language, certainly gave life to it. So we'll open the floor now for comments and questions.
Yeah, Stephen, that was fascinating. Thank you. One of the points that really interests me, and I've read a little bit about this before, at least seen it, heard it mentioned, but the four color process of alchemy and how that kind of mirrors or plays into the Asiatic experience through the degrees of masonry. And I alluded to it, but some of the examples are the Negrado and the darkness. As as a candidate, as a pre-candidate, you go and place this transition between a profane before you enter into the realm of masonry goods that it makes. And then you pass into the Abbey White, you progress through the degrees, you see light way through the progress to the citronite, the yellow, as you learn, you go your Masonic career, you grow in education,
Michael?
awareness, yeah. Yes.
I don't know, your audio on my end is extremely pixelated. Can y'all understand him?
I'm dealing with the same issue here.
All right.
Yeah, I think it's probably his
Sorry.
feed.
I was gonna say, give it just a second, let it catch up. You may try again now.
Is this any better?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just kind of going through the relationship between the four color alchemical process and how that situates itself within the Masonic initiatic experience, and how as a prior to your initiation, you go through the kind of the vesting process and the going from chaos to order, and how each degree in your progress through masonry kind of symbolizes that or mirrors that four color process. I just think that's a fascinating connection there.
I was looking up the information. It's kind of funny you mentioned this about the only difference between medicine and poison is the level of dosage. I think Terry mentioned that today, and I was thinking about mercury and how it made such a pivotal. It was such a pivotal component of alchemy, but yet it's such a deadly component. And I was looking through all of the modern treatments, or I say modern, I'm semi-modern treatments of uses of mercury and quicksilver, as it's called, and I did pick out the alchemical symbol. I looked up one called cinnabar, which is the red clay that that's based out of, and it's pretty interesting, the usages of mercury. And I was wondering how soon after they started working with mercury that they discovered that it was actually a poisonous material. I don't know, but it continues to be used in medicinal settings, so far as I know. Terry could probably speak that
One
more
of
than
the-
I can.
One of the things that I didn't mention that I did write in the paper is it's interesting that although they may have called it mercury, it may not have been mercury as we understand it today. And although they may have called it salts or sulfur, it might not have been exactly what we refer to it as in today's culture. Those words were associated as just a those words were associated with it as a representation of principle. Anything that was liquid was mercury. Anything that burned was sulfur. Anything that was left over or natural was salt. But I understand what you're saying.
Hey, I want to jump in here on that. And by the way, Stephen, that was an awesome presentation. I was going to say, Lane, to your point, something I was thinking about during the presentation is, and I'm glad you hit on this, Stephen, was what you're saying, Lane, about the dosage amounts of different poisons. So something that I've been studying recently about ancient Greece is that they were very heavily into like experimenting with medicines. And so they would, or actually their medicine and their cult and their religion and everything was kind of interconnected, which was really fascinating. Like you see that in the you had the Asclepius, and Hermes, of course, the pole with the snake. And something that I came across recently was that they're actually using snake venom as a medicine, but they would use not just snakes, but all kinds of different animal venoms and different kind of plant poisons and stuff, and they would use them in very microscopic or microdose amounts, and I just thought that was really fascinating how, you mentioned dosage was key, and I think that's totally on it, how they were mixing all these different plants together to get different effects. And I think they would use the different mixtures in their religious rites too. And sometimes their religious rites were also healing rites because they didn't really have hospitals back then. But you kind of think it goes back to shamanism. You'd go to they would call him medicine man, so I can imagine that they had a awesome knowledge of herbs and plants. And so that person was kind of like the modern day physician, but they were kind of like a shaman or even like a priest or priestess too, which I thought that was really fascinating. You can definitely see how our not only our modern medicine, but like the alchemy and different hermetic traditions, go back to those like the ancient Greek and all that. But yeah, great presentation.
I wonder what percentage, Stephen, did you get really into as far as like the time frame of the practice of alchemy, as far as how much of the concentration was actual, what we would call operative science versus, I mean, sure, you get the charlatans out there trying to make metal out of gold, but the actual practice of medicinal chemistry, and then how much and what percent of the time did that occur? Was it 100 years, 200 years? And then how much of it was devoted to the spiritual, philosophical application? Or did they kind of, I know for a period of time they overlap, but I wonder, what if, we like to talk about the philosophical application of it, but I wonder if that was just something that kind of came later, or if that was just
the sources that I used were not very strong sources. I'll tell you that it looks like Paracelsus, because of his writings, was really the one that focused most heavily on the medicinal side of it, and I think we have more medicinal writings from him than anybody else regarding the alchemical side. But I didn't personally study how much they looked into the operative versus the speculative sides of
I was just curious.
I didn't think about it.
One of the things that has always fascinated me from the practical standpoint is how well, those early scientists understood, chemicals, and they didn't quite have a grasp of the atomic structures yet, but how many individual elements that they were able to identify and discern from such an early time period. Now modern scientists stand on the backs of those old early scientists and discoverers. It's always fascinating to me to think about the processes that they used with the rudimentary instruments they had and the understanding that they had to be able to distill those individual elements out to such a degree of accuracy, even though it's not accurate by modern standards, but it was very accurate in the time in which it was, those things were being discovered. And that's always been very fascinating to me from a practical standpoint.
Yeah, it seems like they were pretty good at what they were doing, even though they were limited compared to what we have today.
I think in anything, please go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead, brother. It was going to be a little bit different than what they were talking about. So
I was going to say that I think when you remove the operative side from the speculative side of anything, you lose some aspect of the art. I think it's necessary that they go hand in hand. As you know, as far as masonry goes, as would we have a deeper understanding of the Masonic tools if we went and physically used them? You know, would we think about them more often? I don't know.
I found that.
So I have a question on that,
Go ahead, Terry.
on Stephen's thought. So, understood what you just were stating. The question was, would the study of alchemy and its symbology and its practices improve masonry? Did I get that right?
That's not what I was implying in that statement. What I was implying in that statement would the physical practice of masonry improve speculative masonry? Was that what I was implying in that statement?
And the reason why I ask that question is because oftentimes through my travels, I see people because to think about it and approach it in that manner, you're asking a model to explain another model. Masonry is a model. Alchemy model. So you wouldn't look at one unknown practice to explain another unknown practice, would you? Because you're not controlling the variable. They being extremely different. You can use alchemy, practically speaking, for spiritual understanding, and you can take Freemasonry, practical operative masonry, and use it in a sense, in a spiritual manner. But you wouldn't want to cross pollinate those because you're adding more unknowns as opposed to what you're trying to get, which is a deeper understanding. So the practice of alchemy in and of itself will help, in some instances, act as a model for understanding the material versus the spiritual. And Freemasonry as a model will help you understand practical into spiritual or speculative, however one wants to say it. Just so that's one of the overlaps that I question when they say the same thing you said is how would you do that? That's like asking, can I ask geometry to explain to me how to use algebra? Those are not the same thing, but an understanding of algebra will certainly help you understand geometry, and that's the reason why it's a building block. So we're comparing two building block models. So it's cross-pollinating two different thought processes, just as you can studies.
I was going to ask one of you guys that might have a little bit more knowledge on this than me, but is it the 14th degree of Scottish Rite that goes into alchemy and the different cap colors? I don't know if we can. That's something we can go.
It's either the 14th or the 18th. I'm thinking it was the 18th.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think the 14th is Rose Croix, is it not?
18th.
Or am I wrong?
Yeah, I think it's
There was a little cross pollination there with the is that the symbolism of the different caps?
the colors. Yeah, and there's some it really depends and I'm not an expert on this or at all, but when you talk about that, you mentioned the philosopher's stone. There's another word for it. I can't think of what it's called, but in some theories, the final substance is not white at all, but a red powder, and not a stone at all, but more like we get into some other Mississippi practitioners, experts, into what they consider the ultimate solution to be, but there's some say it ends in white, and some say red, that it's, the final stone is a white one, some of them say red, so that color palette can kind of change.
I saw lots of representations, what looked like illustrations where the stages, fell differently, where calcification might fall here instead of at this stage, or dissolution might fall here instead of there. So I'd be interested to study further to see how many different depictions of those stages there might be.
How many stages did you come with? I know you're talking about you have 3 different colors, but did you come across?
I came across one that had 12 stages, and then a writing that says that there were a writing that said there were 14, but 7 was the most that I had definitions for.
And then sometimes you can see 4, I think, like the putrefaction, the calcification, and the
me personally, I think one of the more interesting aspects of, well, not more interesting, one of the ones that I think took me the most by surprise was more the etymology based stuff that was all throughout the presentation. I didn't realize up until that last slide that you went over there that vitriol, aside from being a word we use nowadays, was that acronym that it detailed in that last slide that was talking about looking inward to find the true stone and all of that kind of stuff. And one of the things that really struck me is when we least ways nowadays, when the word vitriol is used, it's always used as something negative or something bad, either about or for someone to do, which perversions of words happen over time, but and how looking inward to find the real resolution to a lot of problems that we blame on exterior sources in the outside world isn't something that we as humans and society as a whole like to do. So for a word that literally means look inside to find the solution, that now receiving a negative connotation in modern society struck me as something really interesting.
That's a core element of a chamber reflection as well. And I'm assuming Brother Jim, whenever he does his presentation on behalf of the Mississippi Lodge of Research in August, he'll probably speak about that a little bit. But that's the vitriol and the initialism and the looking inside yourself. That's a kind of a central component of a chamber reflection, even the one that we would use for like an apprentice degree.
That's pretty smooth, Michael, by the way. Nice little.
So Lane, you asked a question about the white versus the red.
Uh-huh.
The easiest way to do that is the percentages and ratios, the white, the making of the colors is identical. It's just the white philosopher's style is if you're trying to turn things into silver, and the red is if you're trying to make gold. The white is just don't have as much time. When we talk about how much time it takes in the different stages,
Yeah.
because they weren't just trying to make gold. That's what gets lost in it. It was silver or gold, and it depended on how much time they had to do such.
You're saying that the red is a more purified form?
Yes. No, I'm not saying, because I'm not a practical alchemist. I'm saying if you read, that's what you'll come to the conclusion of.
Gotcha. Okay.
Because I'm still confused why people are still trying to do practical alchemy when it's supposed to be a model for spiritual transformation. Because I hadn't heard, I've been listening to these things now for multiples of years and multiples of books, and I have yet to have anybody tell me how to improve their spiritual walk in whatever their chosen faith is. So it's like I can find out how to make lemon drops. I can find out how to make different brands of beer or use plants to make ayahuasca, but I can't get anybody to tell me what the practical application from a spiritual transmutation occurs. So we get lost trying to review the recipes as opposed to actually doing the work. So that's just a model for understanding.
That's been a little bit of my rub with it, is the processes are not clearly delineated enough to where you really do kind of have to have, in my mind, an understanding of it's just words to me on paper until you have some practical application like distillation. That process, what that means in a practical sense, or, to distill something down into something, and how that differs from the other steps. We always talk about the old adage that pressure makes diamonds, and some of those symbolisms and metaphors that gold is formed through melting and things like that. That I think
Sorry if y'all can hear me. Terry, to your point, and this isn't exactly to your point, but it kind of reminded me. So last night I participated in a morals and dogma. There's a monthly morals and dogma study they go through each degree once a month. And last night we were talking about the 8th degree. And one of Albert Pike's comments there towards the end of that section is the degrees are not, the degrees are also intended to teach more than morals. The symbols and ceremonies of masonry have more than one meaning, but they rather conceal than disclose the truth. Meaning the symbols that we use are not meant to reveal the truth like we commonly think about them. They're meant to conceal the truth. They only hint, at least, at their very meanings, and only to be discovered by reflection and study. Truth is not only symbolized by light, but as a ray of light is separated into rays of different colors. So is truth separable into kinds. So the symbols of masonry and the symbols of alchemy, we could kind of extend to that, are not meant to reveal the truth. They're actually meant to conceal the truth through study and reflection. That's how the truth are revealed. So to your point, Terry, how does alchemy, kind of improve you? It's not through the practical application of it. It's through the study of that symbology, and how can I turn that around and reinterpret it for myself to improve myself?
I was gonna, Terry,
because we can go through those stages, the elements and the elemental changes. If you read, and I'm just approaching this from a Judeo-Christian primarily, even though some other cultures all ritual immersions. So they were writing this primarily. Most of the writings came out during pre-Reformation. So the last thing that was to tell their thoughts on baptism or infilling of the Spirit, as some call it, or walking with God or whatever, these were symbolic language they were using that had a true basis, alchemy, practical, but it was to demonstrate and discuss the spiritual aspects, the theological aspects of it. They were hiding it in plain view. It's just if a person wanted to see a practical application, that's what they would see and that's what they would focus on. To your point, Michael, it was they could go deeper than what the appearance was. What did that transmutation from the material to the spiritual look like? They just had a model they could put on their desk and actually see this is what's supposed to be happening. Some change is supposed to be occurring.
Brethren, if I can jump in, we want to be mindful of everybody's time. We're at our 1 hour mark or slightly over since we started. So let's take time to close the formal portion of our gathering. I'm sure we'll want to stick around for more lively discussion. Brother Bush, again, thank you. Thank you for your research. Thank you for the time that you put into this. And again, a very enlightening, thought-provoking, as we can tell from the discussion presentation, that I'm sure we'll have more questions later on. Our next planned gathering like this will be at the fall equinox, somewhere around mid-September. September 22nd is the date that's currently on the calendar, but that date may shift slightly as needs dictate. So go ahead and put mid-September on your calendar for the next gathering of this group. With that said, we'll take time to close out. And Brother Lane, you can close down the recording when we finish here in a moment. But gentlemen, I'm going to step away from the mic for a few minutes and I'll be right back.